Hello, my name is Devin, and I'm going to show you how to install the optional rotary axis on a multi-platform series table. This is applicable to both the PVD MP and MAD MP families. The steps in this guide should be performed after you have roughly positioned the rotary axis where you would like it to be permanently mounted. Do not bolt the rotary axis to the floor until after you've completed these steps, and you can use the machine itself to help you align the tubing parallel to the travel of your machine. Before we begin, disconnect all power to the machine and follow any required lockout-tagout procedures. The first step is to install the IPC5 power supply using the components shown in the image. Remove the horizontal wire duct cover. You can do this by pinching on the bottom and pulling at an angle until the cover snaps free. Attach the IPC5 power supply to the backplane using the supplied M5 panhead screws, lock nuts, and washers. Loosely install the shielding clip using an M5 panhead screw, flat washer, and lock washer. Before making any electrical connections, I want to explain how cables and wires are labeled. Understanding all of the information presented in the label is not necessary. However, knowing a few key items is very helpful when installing an electrical option. For both cables and wires, the first line contains the family designation and part number. The bottom line explains where the target of the connection is. Right now, we can just pay attention to the information following in the dash. This wire should connect to component XD2, which is a terminal block, at position number 4. Each component will have a label nearby with a designator that matches that shown on the label. Here is terminal block XD2. To make our connection, we would plug the wire into any of the locations available that are marked position 4. Additionally, for cables only, there is a central line that includes the friendly name of the cable assembly and the technical designation found in the schematic. First, we will connect the power supply fan cable. One end of this cable will have two ferrules, a red and a black. Connect these cables by simply pushing them into the designated terminal block locations specified on the labels. Route the cable up into the horizontal wire duct to the left underneath the power supply and connect to the fan connector. This connection is keyed and cannot be plugged in backwards. After making the connection, push the cable in between the fingers to leave room for the cable duct cover. Now we will install the AC input cable for the power supply. Plug the white connector into the only location on the power supply where it will fit. It is keyed and cannot be plugged in backwards. Using an M5 panhead screw, lock washer, and star washer, connect the grounding ring terminal to the backplane. Route the remaining wires down into the horizontal wire duct and over to the left to the AC power supply terminal block. Push each ferrule to connect the wires to the specified terminal block position shown on the label. Finally, press the sides of the wires through the cable duct fingers to leave room for the cover. Reinstall the cable duct cover by angling it over the fingers on one side and then pressing carefully until it snaps back into place. It's time now to prepare the machine to connect the rotary axis cables. For this demonstration, I am using an extended gantry table with a rotary axis that has an integrated support beam. If you are installing a rotary axis that does not have an integrated support beam, you will position the rotary axis at either the front left or the front right of the table. Proceed with the installation as depicted here. However, you do not need to use all of the cable channel. Use only what is necessary to reach your axis. The cable guides mount to existing leg bolts. A quick way to figure out which bolts you need to remove is to hold the cable channel up against the machine, and it will overlap the bolts that need to be taken out. Don't forget there's a flange washer on the inside that can fall if you don't grab it. Since this rotary axis is on the right-hand side of the machine, I will be installing the front cable channel as well. Lay the channel pieces on the ground in front of their mounting locations with the ears away from the table and the open side up. Lay the cable included in the kit on the ground as shown. Pull the cables through the channels going underneath the flat mounting brackets. As you pull the cable, you do not want to pull on the connectors themselves because it's pulling on the small wires inside of the cable. Instead, we pull on the jacket of the cable when we're running it through the machine. As you watch, notice that the cable is relatively robust. We just have to avoid narrow kinks and any type of tight pressure that could cause a breakage of the small gauge wire inside of the cable. Once the cable has been pulled through the channel, we will leave a large loop in between the two pieces. This lets us lift them up one at a time and mount them to the side of the table. Mount the channels to the sides of the table, being careful not to pull on the cables too hard. Here, I struggle along on my own, but if you have a helper available, I highly recommend using them. Lightly tightening the flange nuts onto the bolts allows me to keep this channel in place while I move to the front. While installing this second piece of channel, just be careful that you don't kink or trap the cable in between the joint or between the channel and the leg. A last tightening of these bolts with a 17mm hex wrench, and we're ready to go on to the next step. Now we're going to begin the cable shuffle of trying to get the cable properly into the control box so that we can make any termination connections, and then we're going to begin removing slack back away from the box towards the rotary axis. Once there's sufficient slack over near the control box, we will go across the cable carrier plate and down through the small hole, following the path of the other control cables already pulled at the factory. When you're inserting the cable connectors through the rubber gasket, be careful that you pull on the cable and not on the wires. We don't want to damage any cables at this point. Once all the connectors have passed through the cable gasket, pull the remaining slack into the control box. This extra cable just makes it easier to finalize your connections inside. The first cable to be installed is the black power supply cable for the servo motors. Insert the black connector into either of the ports on the IPC5. It is keyed and cannot be installed incorrectly. Route the shield down towards the clip on the back plane, and then the remainder of the cable up to the top of the box, around to the right, following the path of the existing power cables. Notice that I tucked this cable behind the existing gray cables. The shield bonding clip should still be loose from earlier. Turn it over the window in the cable, being careful to get the clip fully encompassing the cable and not pinching any of the wires inside. When you tighten it down using a Phillips head screwdriver, be sure that the cable does not get pinched internally by the edges of the clip. You do not need to crush this connector, but we do want a solid connection with the backplane for the maximum noise resistance. Next, we will install the control cable for the motor. It installs into the position on the controller labeled Motors number 5. Route it along the same path as the other control cables coming out of the top of the board. Connect the last cable, which is the rotary axis home switch, to the position marked L4 on the controller. Route the cable's window towards the finger on the bracket next to the controller marked position 5. Feed any extra cable out of the box. Bend a zip tie into a small loop and feed it over the finger. Run it around the cable and then tighten down onto the finger so that the shield makes good contact with the aluminum bracket. Be careful when you're using a cable or a zip tie to connect cables to any type of mounting bracket or to each other. It's very easy to over-tighten them and damage internal wires. We want it snug, but not so tight that anything gets broken. Verify the path of the control and power cable that we pulled earlier, and then bend a zip tie into a C. Feed it behind the existing cable bundle and attach the two new cables to this bundle. Trim away the tag ends, and we're done inside of the control box. Now we begin working the slack in the cable back towards the rotary axis. I use two zip ties to maintain the bend, following the same path as the existing control cable bundle. In the bottom of each cable guide, there are slots cut near the ends that we can use to anchor the entry and exit point of the cable into each of the guides. We're just going to continue moving the slack in the cable towards the rotary axis and anchoring with these zip ties at each point. This is the position where if you were mounting the rotary axis to the front left-hand side of the table, you would stop. Final connections are made between the cabling in the machine and the rotary axis using these silver shielded connectors. To identify the correct cables to connect, you can use the friendly name printed on each label. Lightly press the front faces of the two connector halves together and rotate until the keys align. Press the pins firmly in, and then take the front nose of the connector and screw it together until it stops. Insert the connector assembly into its hanger by angling slightly and pushing the cable up into the top connector and then lowering it down into the bottom holder. Now it's time to install the work lead. First, clean the rotary axis bonding tab using Scotch-Brite fine grit sandpaper. Then, install the work lead's large ring terminal to the tab using the supplied hardware. Connect the other end of the work lead to the machine's bonding bar. Again, clean the bar before installing with the provided hardware. If you install both cable guides as I did in this demonstration, use the provided corner cap to both tidy and protect the cables as they go around the corner of the machine's leg. The last thing to do is to tidy up the cables and make sure that the loop between the rotary axis and the cable guide allows for proper adjustment of the rotary head up and down. The electrical installation of the rotary attachment is now complete. If you have any questions or require further assistance, please contact us at support@jd2.com.